For over 3 decades, Fourplay wasn't just a band. They were the heartbeat of smooth jazz. A supergroup of masters who turned improvisation into poetry, whose sound became the backdrop to countless lives. From concert halls to living rooms, their music felt timeless, effortless, unshakable. Fourplay seemed destined to last forever. But behind the elegance and the flawless recordings was another story. One that never made it into interviews. One that the music industry preferred to leave untouched. Every departure was explained away with polite words. Every fracture was disguised as evolution. Fans were told not to question. And for years, they didn't. Now, time has pulled back the curtain. The truth about Fourplay isn't the simple story of a band aging gracefully. It's a tale of ambition, compromise, and the quiet unraveling of a group that once defined a genre. So what actually happened to Fourplay? And why does the truth still leave fans unsettled? In the early 1990s, smooth jazz was at a crossroads. The genre had been steadily climbing out of the smoky clubs and into mainstream consciousness, but it still lacked something that could push it into true global stardom. Enter Fourplay, a band that was never meant to be just another jazz act. They were a supergroup, crafted from the finest musicians the industry had to offer, and they arrived with a mission: to rewrite the rules of contemporary jazz. Fourplay wasn't formed by accident. Keyboardist Bob James, already a legend in the jazz fusion world, had been itching for a project that could blend sophistication with accessibility. He joined forces with guitarist Lee Rittenour, bassist Nathan East, and drummer Harvey Mason, three musicians whose resumes read like a who's who of modern music. Between them, they had worked with everyone from Whitney Houston to George Benson to Michael Jackson. Together, they represented the ultimate dream team. Their debut album in 1991 didn't just succeed, it exploded. The self-titled Fourplay became a platinum-selling record, a rarity in jazz. Suddenly, they were headlining festivals, selling out venues, and dominating jazz radio in a way no instrumental group had done in decades. Songs like Bali Run and After the Dance blurred the line between jazz and pop, seducing fans who had never thought they'd enjoy a genre known for improvisational complexity. But with great success came great expectations. Fans adored their polished sound, critics were divided, and record executives smelled money. Fourplay was now more than a band. They were a brand. And when music becomes business, the cracks are never far behind. Behind the polished harmonies and smooth grooves was an undercurrent of tension. Each member had their own thriving career outside of Fourplay, and balancing the demands of a supergroup with their individual ambitions proved trickier than expected. The pressure to constantly innovate while keeping their signature sound intact weighed heavily on them. They were celebrated as pioneers, but secretly, the question began to emerge. How long could this fragile alliance of titans really last? The answer would arrive sooner than anyone expected. The public saw Fourplay as a glamorous collaboration of equals, but insiders knew the formation of the band was more complicated and far more calculated. Bob James, the architect of the project, wasn't just chasing a new sound. He was chasing control. James had long been frustrated by the constraints of being a solo artist. He was respected, yes, but he wanted something that would cement his legacy beyond the jazz niche. By recruiting three younger, flashier musicians, he could surround himself with brilliance while ensuring he remained the quiet leader at the core of the group. On the surface, it was democratic. In reality, Bob James was pulling the strings. Lee Rittenour, already an acclaimed guitarist, joined because he saw Fourplay as a chance to elevate smooth jazz into mainstream relevance. But according to people close to him, Rittenour never liked being treated as a sideman. He was used to being the star of his own albums, not sharing equal billing with three others. The tension simmered quietly in the studio, masked by the band's polished chemistry. Nathan East, the bassist with the golden touch, had perhaps the most to lose. Known for his versatility, he had played with Eric Clapton, Phil Collins, and countless others. Joining Fourplay meant committing to a project that might overshadow his lucrative session career. Still, he signed on, lured by the promise of being part of something historic. Then there was Harvey Mason, the steady hand, the veteran drummer who had worked with legends like Herbie Hancock. Mason was the glue, but even he wasn't immune to the strain. Some insiders whispered that Mason felt underappreciated, his subtle contributions often overlooked in favor of the flashier solos from Rittenour or James. From the start, Fourplay wasn't just a band. It was a delicate balancing act of egos, ambitions, and expectations. On stage, they made it look effortless. Off-stage, however, the story was different. There were arguments over songwriting credits, disputes about touring schedules, and constant debates over the musical direction of the group. Still, for the first few years, the tensions remained hidden. The records sold, the audiences cheered, and Fourplay was hailed as a smooth jazz revolution. But beneath the surface, the seeds of conflict had already been planted, and it was only a matter of time before they took root. By the mid-1990s, Fourplay had become a household name in the world of jazz fusion. Their albums consistently topped the charts, and their tours drew fans from every corner of the globe. But success, as always, came at a cost. And for Fourplay, the cost was unity. The first cracks appeared during recording sessions. Bob James was notorious for his perfectionism, insisting on endless takes until every note was polished to his liking. Rittenour, known for his improvisational flair, bristled at James's rigid control. Their creative clashes often spilled into heated arguments, with engineers recalling nights when sessions nearly came to a halt because neither would compromise. Nathan East, the consummate professional, often played the peacemaker. But even he had limits. As his reputation grew outside the band, especially through his high-profile work with Eric Clapton, he began questioning whether Fourplay was holding him back. Insiders claim that East once confided to a friend, "I'm not sure if I'm building my legacy or just Bob's." Harvey Mason, meanwhile, simmered with quiet frustration. His drumming was essential to Fourplay's sound, yet he rarely received the spotlight. Audiences swooned over James's keys or Rittenour's guitar solos, while Mason's steady brilliance went unnoticed. Friends whispered that he felt like the forgotten member, crucial yet invisible. The tensions reached a breaking point during their third album, Elixir. What should have been a celebration of their dominance instead turned into a battleground. Disputes over track selection, credits, and musical direction left scars that never fully healed. The once seamless camaraderie began to feel like a fragile truce. Still, the public remained oblivious. Fourplay smiled on magazine covers, dazzled on stage, and gave polished interviews about their brotherhood. But behind closed doors, that brotherhood was fraying. The question wasn't if someone would leave, it was when. And when it finally happened, the shockwaves shook the entire jazz world. By 1995, Fourplay was no longer just a jazz group. They were an empire. Every album they released went straight to the top of the jazz charts. Their tours stretched across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, filling theaters that smooth jazz acts had never dreamed of conquering. What started as an experiment had turned into a phenomenon. But for the men inside Fourplay, success was a double-edged sword. The very thing that made them so appealing, the blend of four individual stars, was also what made the band increasingly fragile. Each member had his own career, his own commitments, and his own ego. For Bob James, Fourplay was the crown jewel of his career, the project that finally cemented his place in the mainstream after decades of being respected only in jazz circles. But for Lee Rittenour, Nathan East, and Harvey Mason, it sometimes felt like they were sacrificing their own identities to fuel James's vision. Tensions worsened when touring schedules became unbearable. Fourplay was in such high demand that management kept booking them for months on end. While the money was good, the grind wore on the musicians. Rittenour, in particular, began to resist the idea that Fourplay should dominate his life. He had solo projects, film scoring opportunities, and a reputation as one of the most versatile guitarists of his generation. But whenever he tried to step away, there was pressure to put Fourplay first. Fans saw nothing but glamour: packed houses, roaring applause, elegant performances. But behind the curtain, fatigue and resentment built up. Arguments about set lists became common. Debates over which markets to tour in turned into shouting matches. There were even stories of members walking out of rehearsals, unwilling to compromise. It wasn't just the workload. Creative direction became a battlefield. Bob James favored a sleek, polished sound, meticulously arranged and radio-friendly. Rittenour longed for something looser, more adventurous, with space to experiment. East and Mason were caught in the middle, sometimes siding with James, other times with Rittenour, depending on the song. Every decision felt like a tug of war, with the band's unity stretched thinner by the day. By the time their third album Elixir dropped in 1995, the cracks were showing. It was a commercial success, but insiders whispered about the tension during recording. The process was grueling, the disagreements sharper than ever. Fourplay smiled for the cameras, but privately, they were unraveling. The irony was undeniable. The very success that had made Fourplay legendary was also tearing them apart. And soon, one of them would decide he'd had enough. When news broke in 1997 that Lee Rittenour was leaving Fourplay, fans were stunned. To outsiders, the band looked untouchable, selling millions, adored worldwide, redefining jazz for a new generation. Why would one of its founding stars walk away at the height of their success? The answer was both simple and explosive. Rittenour had reached his breaking point. For years, he had struggled with the band's direction. Rittenour's artistry was rooted in flexibility. He had dabbled in jazz, rock, Brazilian music, and even pop. Fourplay, however, demanded consistency. The group's identity relied on a specific sound, and any attempt to deviate sparked conflict. According to insiders, Rittenour felt stifled, creatively trapped inside the polished box Bob James insisted on building. There were personal clashes, too. Though Rittenour and James respected each other's musicianship, their relationship was strained by power struggles. James was the de facto leader, and Rittenour bristled under his control. Arguments over songwriting credits and musical choices grew heated. One producer later confessed, "It wasn't about the music anymore. It was about who had the final say." The touring grind also played a major role. Rittenour had a family and a thriving solo career, and Fourplay's relentless schedule left little room for either. He was tired of being locked into a machine that demanded constant output. To him, Fourplay was starting to feel less like a band and more like a business. His departure was a shock, but it was also a statement. By walking away, Rittenour forced the world to see the truth. Fourplay wasn't the flawless brotherhood fans believed it to be. It was a fragile alliance, one that could, and did, fracture under the weight of success. Still, Rittenour's exit didn't kill the band. Instead, they brought in Larry Carlton, another jazz guitar icon, to fill the void. Carlton's arrival gave Fourplay a fresh energy, and, for a time, It seemed like they had weathered the storm. But Rittenour's absence left a scar. Fans debated endlessly over which version of Fourplay was real. The split created factions, with some loyal to Rittenour's era and others embracing Carlton's. In the end, Rittenour's departure was both inevitable and devastating. It marked the first major fracture in Fourplay's history, and it proved that even supergroups are not immune to implosion. To the outside world, Bob James was the anchor of Fourplay, the quiet genius behind the keys, the veteran guiding the ship. But what fans didn't know was that James himself was struggling, caught between his role as leader and his private doubts. James had built his career on precision and polish. He was a perfectionist, a craftsman who demanded excellence in every note. That discipline had served him well in his solo career, but in Fourplay, it became both his strength and his burden. While audiences praised the group's seamless sound, James carried the weight of holding it all together. Every creative clash, every scheduling nightmare, every business decision seemed to land on his shoulders. Privately, James confided in friends that he felt trapped. Fourplay was supposed to be liberating, a collaboration of equals, but instead, he often felt like a manager, refereeing between egos and smoothing over conflicts. When Rittenour left, James took it personally. To him, it wasn't just a bandmate walking away, it was a rejection of the dream he had worked so hard to build. There were financial pressures too. Fourplay was a commercial powerhouse, but that meant constant demands from labels, promoters, and managers. James, who had once thrived in the creative freedom of jazz, now found himself buried under the machinery of the industry. He loved the music, but he hated the circus surrounding it. Even his health wasn't immune. Long tours and endless recording sessions took a toll on his energy. By the late 90s, friends worried that James was burning out, though he rarely admitted it publicly. He pushed himself to keep Fourplay alive, even as the joy that once fueled him began to fade. James's silent struggles revealed a painful truth. Fourplay wasn't just breaking its members apart, it was breaking its leader too. And though the band would continue to thrive for years, the toll it took on Bob James would never fully heal. When Larry Carlton stepped into Fourplay in 1997, it wasn't just a lineup change, it was a complete reinvention. Lee Rittenour's departure had left fans shaken, and many wondered if the group could survive. Carlton, however, wasn't just any replacement. He was a guitar legend in his own right, a musician with a resume so deep it stretched from Steely Dan to Joni Mitchell, to hundreds of session recordings that defined the sound of the 1970s and 80s. His arrival brought both hope and controversy, as fans braced to see whether Fourplay's magic would endure or collapse. Carlton entered the band at a strange moment. On the surface, Fourplay was still thriving, but internally, the wounds of Rittenour's exit had not healed. Bob James was protective of the group's identity, Nathan East was trying to balance diplomacy with artistry, and Harvey Mason was focused on keeping the rhythm intact. Carlton had to navigate a dynamic that was already fragile, but he did so with quiet confidence. From the start, Carlton's sound shifted the band's direction. Where Rittenour was known for his clean, polished tones and versatile phrasing, Carlton brought grit, blues, and an edge that reshaped Fourplay's style. Albums like For and Yes, Please showcased this new energy. Fans heard it immediately. Songs had more bite, solos carried more weight, and the interplay between instruments felt less pristine and more raw. To some, it was a refreshing evolution. To others, it was a betrayal of the smooth elegance that had defined the group's early years. The critics were divided too. Jazz purists praised Carlton's presence, arguing that he gave Fourplay credibility in a genre often accused of being too commercial. But fans of smooth jazz radio missed the lush precision of Rittenour's era. Record sales dipped slightly, though the band continued to dominate charts within their niche. The split created what many called the two eras of Fourplay, Rittenour's and Carlton's. Offstage, Carlton's integration wasn't without tension. Though respected, he was never fully seen as part of the original brotherhood. Some insiders claimed that Bob James and Carlton clashed over solos, with James preferring structure and Carlton favoring improvisation. Others whispered about disagreements over touring schedules and songwriting credits. Yet, despite the friction, the band pressed forward, determined to prove they could survive change. Carlton himself was carrying baggage. In 1988, nearly a decade before joining Fourplay, he had been shot in the throat during a random attack outside his studio in Los Angeles. The injury was devastating. It damaged his vocal cords and nearly ended his career. But his recovery and return to music became part of his legend. Fans admired his resilience, and joining Fourplay gave him a new platform to showcase his artistry. For nearly a decade, Carlton anchored Fourplay through ups and downs, but the constant touring, recording, and pressure eventually wore on him too. By 2010, after 12 albums with the group, Carlton decided to step away, citing a desire to focus on his solo career and family. His departure marked the end of another era and reopened the wounds Fourplay thought they had healed. Still, Carlton's time in the band proved something vital. Fourplay was bigger than any one member. They could adapt, evolve, and survive, even if it meant leaving behind pieces of their original identity. But change always came at a cost, and the cycle of departures was far from over. If there was one member of Fourplay who seemed unshakable, it was Nathan East. The bassist was the glue that held the group together, the steady presence in the middle of storms. Known for his smooth style and legendary versatility, East wasn't just Fourplay's foundation. He was one of the most in-demand bass players in the world. His resume included everyone from Eric Clapton to Michael Jackson to Phil Collins. For years, fans assumed East would never leave the group. But behind the scenes, his loyalty came at a heavy price. From the beginning, East struggled with balance. Fourplay demanded constant time, but so did his career as a session player. He was flying from city to city, recording with megastars, then rushing back to join Fourplay on tour. Friends said he barely slept, often juggling rehearsals, recording sessions, and flights with little downtime. His schedule wasn't just exhausting, it was unsustainable. Worse, East often found himself caught in the middle of conflicts. When Rittenour clashed with Bob James, East was the mediator. When Carlton pushed for more freedom, East was the bridge between competing visions. Even Harvey Mason once admitted that East was the peacemaker of the group, the one who could calm tempers when egos flared. But being the diplomat took a toll. Privately, East confessed that he sometimes felt like he was parenting the band, keeping it from falling apart rather than fully enjoying the music. There was also the matter of identity. Fourplay gave East global recognition, but it often overshadowed his individual artistry. Though beloved as a bassist, he was rarely seen as a frontman. His songwriting contributions were subtle, his solos often understated. Fans cheered his groove, but the spotlight was usually on James's keys or the guitarist of the moment. For a man of East's talent, that lack of recognition sometimes stung. By the mid-2000s, East faced a dilemma. Fourplay was still successful, but he was tired of being tied down. He wanted to step out of the shadows and pursue his own vision. In 2014, he finally made the leap, releasing his first solo album, a project that proved he wasn't just a sideman. The album earned critical acclaim, showing the world what many already knew. Nathan East was more than the backbone of Fourplay. He was an artist in his own right. But even as he explored his independence, East never fully abandoned the group. His ties to Fourplay were too deep, his history too intertwined. Still, his growing solo career highlighted a painful truth. Every member of Fourplay, no matter how dedicated, eventually wrestled with the same conflict between the collective and the individual. For East, that tension was never fully resolved. Through every storm, every departure, and every reinvention, one man remained: Harvey Mason. The drummer was the heartbeat of Fourplay, the constant presence from the very beginning until the very end. But Mason's story was not one of glory. It was one of survival. By the time Fourplay formed in 1991, Mason was already a legend. He had played with Herbie Hancock's Headhunters, contributed to countless records, and built a reputation as one of the most versatile drummers in the business. Joining Fourplay gave him something he hadn't had before: stability. While others came and went, Mason stayed put, determined to keep the band alive. Yet, Mason paid a price for that loyalty. As Bob James wrestled with leadership, Rittenour and Carlton fought over direction, and Nathan East pursued outside projects, Mason was left carrying the weight of continuity. Insiders said he was the quiet workhorse of the group, the one who showed up on time, kept the music tight, and rarely complained. But the burden wasn't light. Privately, Mason admitted to feeling overlooked. Fans loved his groove, but drummers rarely get the same recognition as guitarists or pianists. Critics often framed Fourplay's story as a battle between James and whichever guitarist was in the lineup, leaving Mason's contributions underappreciated. Even Nathan East, with his session credits, often received more public attention. Mason was the backbone, but he was also the invisible man. Still, Mason's consistency gave Fourplay credibility. No matter how many times the lineup shifted, fans could count on his steady rhythm to anchor the sound. His loyalty kept the band from dissolving entirely when others left. But as the years passed, even Mason felt the weight of time. By the 2010s, with Bob James slowing down and East pursuing solo projects, Mason was the last man holding on. In interviews, he sometimes hinted at frustration, acknowledging the difficulty of keeping Fourplay relevant in a changing music world. Smooth jazz, once dominant on radio, had lost its cultural cachet. Younger audiences weren't buying CDs or tuning into jazz stations, and touring became harder to sustain. Mason, ever the professional, kept playing, but even he knew the era of Fourplay was fading. His story revealed the hardest truth of all: loyalty has its costs. While others pursued new paths, Mason gave everything to keep Fourplay alive. In the end, his reward was bittersweet. He was the last man standing, but he was also the one left watching the dream slowly unravel. By the time the 2010s rolled around, Fourplay was no longer the unstoppable force it once had been. Their albums, once guaranteed chart toppers, began to fade into the background of a music industry that had little time for smooth jazz. Streaming was taking over, radio was collapsing, and younger audiences weren't interested in the genre that had defined Fourplay's rise. The band that once seemed untouchable now faced the harsh reality of irrelevance. But the true story of why Fourplay disappeared wasn't just about the industry. It was about time, egos, and the quiet unraveling of a dream. The first blow was the endless lineup changes. Lee Rittenour's departure had already fractured the group's identity, and though Larry Carlton gave them new life, his exit in 2010 reopened old wounds. Chuck Loeb stepped in, but by then, the chemistry wasn't the same. Fans who had grown attached to the original four saw the band as a revolving door, each new member further distancing the group from its roots. The very thing that made Fourplay iconic, the magic of four specific musicians, was gone. Then there was Bob James. As the de facto leader and architect of the group's sound, James carried the heaviest burden. But years of touring, recording, and internal politics wore him down. Friends said he grew tired of mediating creative battles and pushing against the tide of a fading genre. By the mid-2010s, James was stepping back, more focused on personal projects than on keeping Fourplay alive. Without his relentless drive, the band's engine sputtered. Financial realities also played a part. Smooth jazz had once been a lucrative market, with radio stations dedicated to the genre and festivals that sold out across the world. But as tastes shifted, opportunities dried up. Touring became less profitable, albums sold fewer copies, and the cost of keeping Fourplay together outweighed the rewards. Even for musicians of their caliber, survival in a declining genre was a brutal calculation. And yet, the final unspoken reason Fourplay disappeared was more personal. After decades of playing together, the members simply grew apart. Nathan East found new life as a solo artist and continued working with megastars. Larry Carlton returned to his solo career. Chuck Loeb, who had taken up the mantle after Carlton, tragically passed away in 2017 after a battle with cancer, leaving the band shaken and incomplete. Harvey Mason, the one who held on the longest, eventually had to face the truth. Without the others, there was no Fourplay. Their final studio album, Silver, was both a celebration and a farewell. Released to mark their 25th anniversary, it featured guest appearances from Rittenour, Carlton, and Loeb, a symbolic reunion of all the guitarists who had shaped their journey. To fans, it felt like closure, even if the band never officially announced a breakup. The album wasn't just a look back at their history, it was a quiet acknowledgement that the story was ending. In the end, Fourplay didn't implode in scandal or collapse in bitterness. They simply faded away, victims of time, change, and the inevitable decline of the genre they had once dominated. For some, it was heartbreaking, a band that had redefined smooth jazz, slipping into silence without the farewell tour or grand finale they deserved. But for others, it was fitting. Fourplay was never about drama or spectacle. They were about music, and when the music stopped, so did the band. Today, their legacy remains undeniable. Fourplay sold millions of albums, brought jazz to mainstream audiences, and created a sound that influenced an entire generation. Their disappearance wasn't a fall from grace. It was the natural ending of a story that had run its course. The truth is simple. Fourplay didn't vanish in disgrace. They bowed out quietly, leaving behind a body of work that still plays on radios, playlists, and memories around the world. Fourplay didn't die. They transformed into legend. If the harmony was truly unbreakable, why did the fractures run so deep? And why were the goodbyes always spoken in whispers? Fourplay remains a cornerstone of smooth jazz, their music etched into time, their legacy undeniable. But the truth of what happened to them depends not on the notes they played, but on the silences in between. Before nostalgia turns their story into a polished memory, remember, behind every seamless groove lies a tension never meant to surface. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.